My name is Lana, and I'm a fan of sensual stories and explicit movies. I've put together a collection of the best stories that I'm sharing with you. Now, we're going to listen to a very special one. Let's go! Hey, Aunt Wendy, look at this! It's my new science project. Wendy looked up from her book. Stanley was standing in the entrance to the den, curly-haired, skinny, and grinning boyishly. He looked like the 18-year-old bundle of twitchy nerdiness that he was. Wendy sighed, perhaps agreeing to take in her older sister's prodigy for 2 weeks while she gallivanted around Europe had not been a wise idea. The kid was brilliant, but as hyperactive as a Scotch terrier. Stanley was holding a contraption in both hands. It looked vaguely like a camera, except there were wires and lights protruding from it. Some of the parts were held on by alligator clips. The whole thing had the look of one of Stanley's kooky experiments. Wendy still remembered how he had remodeled the toaster to play classical music while it burned the toast, or the self-flushing toilet, about which the less said, the better. She sighed again. Very well, Stanley. What is it this time? He was still grinning. I told you, it's my new science project for advanced physicists. Stanley was enrolled in a bunch of courses for gifted students. He excelled in all of them. I heard that the first time. What is it? His smile did not diminish. It's a pulse synchronization flash induction device. I designed it myself. Cool, yeah? Wendy looked pained. Conversations with Stanley were replete with unintelligible jargon. Right, she said. I meant, what does it do exactly? Her nerdy nephew advanced into the room. Well, it produces a series of step-harmonized light pulses that induce a hypnotic state in the receiver. His grin faltered briefly. I hope, he added. Wendy thought wistfully of her book. She was just getting to the interesting part. She was relaxing in the den late in the evening, unwinding after the workday. The television was on in the background. Wendy was dressed casually in a sweatshirt and hockey pants. She had taken to covering up around home in the past week. Her horny teenage nephew was a little too interested in his aunt's abandoned curves. She picked up her book. It's nice, Stanley. I'm sure your teacher will be very impressed. No, really, it works, Aunt Wendy, the young man insisted. Look, I'll show you. He pointed the device toward her. He pushed a button on one side. Wendy was about to say something else. The gizmo emitted a bright white flash. It dazzled her for a second. Before she could fully recover, it flashed again and again, first red, then deep blue. The fourth flash was brilliant gold. For long seconds, she sat still, blinking. That was unexpected. Her super-intelligent nephew had invented a multicolored camera flash. Tugged that one up alongside the musical toaster. The colors were pretty, at least. Stanley was looking at her as if he expected something. Wendy smiled indulgently. Well, what about it? Am I supposed to be hypnotized or something? It doesn't work like that, Stanley replied. He was dressed as he always was, in a plaid work shirt and blue jeans, faded Nikes. The step-harmonized wavelength should make the recipient suggestible, sort of more open to outside influences. Excuse me? Said the curvaceous blonde aunt. Look, I'll show you, Stanley enthused. Take off that sweatshirt. What? Why? He shrugged evasively. It's hard to explain otherwise. I need you to take off the sweatshirt to show you how the device works, all right? She raised both hands. Okay, but I hardly see how my sweat has anything to do with your auto-hypnosis gadget. She stood up and pulled the cotton sweatshirt over her head. She dropped it on the sofa. Underneath, she was wearing a tight white t-shirt, a little too tight, Wendy considered, when her shower peeping nephew was around. That was one reason for the sweatshirt. Her full breasts pressed against the fabric, round and proud. She looked at him. So, now what? She asked. She did notice his eyes lingering on her tits. She got that look often enough to recognize it at once. Stanley was grinning like he had just won a bet. See, you took off your sweatshirt. You responded to an external suggestion. What? You just told me to. Oh, that's ridiculous. She reached for the discarded sweatshirt. Don't put it back on. His voice was urgent. Wendy stopped. She raised an eyebrow at him. He waved his free hand in a gesture of exasperation. Okay, that didn't really test the device very well. I'll try to explain this better. Watch this. Without warning, he pointed the thing at her and pushed the button. White, red, blue, gold. Again, the bright lights dazzled her eyes. For a few seconds she stood in place, swaying and blinking. The lights were so intense, so pretty, it took a while to process what her eyes had seen. She forgot to pick up her sweatshirt. There, Stanley said with satisfaction. Now, do me a favor. Go put on that blue denim mini you used to wear sometimes. Wendy looked at him blankly. It took a while to get her mind back on track. What? She protested at last. Whatever for? What has that skirt got to do with your silly little gizmo? This time it was Stanley who signed patiently. Aunt Wendy, I can't explain how the device works unless you comply. It's important. Just go put it on, okay? That skirt shrank in the wash. It doesn't fit anymore. That's why I stopped wearing it. Put it on anyway, so I can explain how this works. Wendy still couldn't see a connection between his hypno camera and her apparel. She didn't feel like arguing about it. Maybe if she indulged him, he would let her go back to her book. Oh, very well, she conceded. Hold on, I'll be right back. She trotted out of the den toward her bedroom. She returned less than 3 minutes later. In place of the comfortable slacks, she was now wearing a blue denim miniskirt set off by a broad white belt. She had bought the skirt one day when she felt like wearing something sexy. It had been revealingly short even before it shrank in the wash. It gripped her ass tightly. Still, Wendy had to concede the little skirt did reveal a terrific pair of evenly tanned legs, rather too much of those legs, in fact. Her white, athletic shoes matched the light t-shirt. The belt was decorated with multicolored rhinestones. Very well, she said. Here I am. Now, what is this all about? If Stanley had been admiring his aunt before, now he was outright staring. Wow, you look great, Aunt Wendy, he blurted. His grin threatened to dislocate his jaw. The well-built blonde fidgeted under his artless gaze. Never mind that. You keep your eyes in your head, young man. What are we? Without warning, Stanley raised the camera and flashed her again. A quartet of blinding colored lights bombarded her eyes. I didn't mean to be rude, Stanley explained to the miniskirted beauty swaying and blinking in front of him. A guy can't help noticing that his aunt is so pretty. You're very pretty, Aunt Wendy. Unexpectedly, Wendy felt herself blush. She was still feeling spacey from the last flash. The colors lingered on her retinas. Oh, well, thank you, she replied softly. It's sweet of you to say so. She was feeling too good at that moment to raise a fuss about how he was ogling her. She decided instead to steer the conversation back to where it belonged. Now, about your gadget. What did you call it? A pulse synchronization flash induction device. Right, whatever. The thing is, I don't see how me wearing this skirt explains. You know, Stanley interrupted casually, you would look even better if you ditched the track shoes. They're not very flattering with that pretty mini. Wendy looked down at her pumas, then up at Stanley. Her shoes were trendy and brand new. What? You don't like my shoes now? Well, I'm hardly going to change for. Oh. Stanley had flashed her again. White, red, blue, and gold danced around her mind. For a long moment, the whole world became sunlight through a stained glass window. Someone gave a happy sigh. It may have been her. You'd want to look pretty, don't you, Auntie? Stanley asked. Course. She smiled at him. He was handsome, she decided in a nerdy kind of way. Of course, her nephew agreed. You want to look your best. That's only natural. You're like a way good-looking woman and you know it. You should be proud of your looks. It's great to look sexy. Looking sexy makes you feel sexy, right? Wendy couldn't deny the logic of what he was saying. It was nice to know she was attractive. Nevertheless, she frowned at him. Now you look here. Watch what you say, Stanley, she scolded. She put her hands on her hips assertively. I'm still your aunt, and you will address me accordingly. It felt good to be back in control. Stanley looked cowed. He said, I only meant, I know you like to look your best. It's like exciting to be haughty. Look, I'll show you. Throw off those shoes. Once again, the non sequitur caught her by surprise. Okay, why? She bent carefully to pull off her lacy sport shoes. She kicked them to one side. Hold on a second, Stanley said. He strode across the room, gizmo in hand, and picked up a shopping bag from behind the television. He handed it to her. Put these on instead. You'll see what I mean. You'll feel much better. Wendy took the bag. She peered inside. It held a pair of short black boots with low heels. She pulled one out, scolding. Hey, these are my best boots. Where did you? You've been snooping around in my closet. Stanley lowered his head like a scared dog, yet he persisted. Put them on, okay? Please, I'll explain everything, he replied diffidently. You had better. Wendy decided she had suffered enough of Stanley's rude behavior. Rifling through her closet was the last straw. Still, she sat down on the sofa. She tossed her book to one side. She felt her too brave mini side up to the top of her thighs. She picked up one boot and began to slip it over her foot. She stopped when she felt something inside. She reached in and pulled out a shiny red sock. She held it up by one end. It was quite long. What's this? She wanted to know. Stanley shrugged apologetically. I got them for you. They go with the boots. Go ahead, put them on. See how much better you feel when you're dressed right. Wendy got to her feet. Look, Stanley, this nonsense has gone on too long. I don't know what kind of trick you're playing here, but I'm not going to stand still another. Oh, ah! Stanley has flashed her with this inducer thingy again. This room was a bright paradise of white, then red, then blue, all glinting with gold. Wendy stuttered, almost lost her balance. She dropped the sock in her hand. "Put the boots on, Auntie Wendy," Stanley instructed. "You know they will look great on you." She was grinning loosely. She couldn't help it. Sure," she agreed vaguely. "Good idea." She sat back down on the sofa. She picked up one sock and slowly tugged it over her foot and up her leg. It went up a long way. When she was satisfied that it was straight and smooth, she repeated the action with the other sock. Then she pulled on the sexy, chunky-heeled boots. She slid up the zippers on the sides. She got to her feet slowly, looking down at herself. The socks were crimson. They flowed up her legs to well above the knees, emphasizing her graceful curves. Combined with the scanty miniskirt and fashion boots, they shouted, "Look at my legs!" to the whole world. She looked like a teenage hottie on her way to a club, or the kind of pin-up fantasy girl she was sure Stanley could only dream about. She felt her nipples pressing against the confines of her brassiere, inside the tight pullover. Stanley was grinning. "You feel good now, don't you, Auntie?" he suggested. Wendy was grinning too. Her eyes were lidded. "Why, yes, I do. I feel delicious." She ran both hands down her flanks, over the belt and down her tiny skirt. She giggled in delight. Stanley explained it. "That's because you're a hot babe and you feel hot when you look hot." She waved a hand at him. "Oh, the things you say." She was still admiring herself. The thin red socks were garish and too young for her. The whole outfit was immodest and over the top. Yet she did look splendid. She shuffled one foot back and forth, admiring the effect. "My God, you look good, Auntie Wendy," Stanley said with enthusiasm. "Hey, let your hair down too. It looks better that way." "Oh, well, all right." She couldn't think of any reason to object to that. Thinking in general wasn't a big priority at the moment. Wendy's hair was swept up in a simple fold. She pulled out a couple of barrettes. Thick curls of meat-blonde hair tumbled down over her shoulders. She shook her head to sort it out. She fluffed it gently with her fingers. "How's that?" she inquired, turning to study her nephew. He was admiring her in a way that made Wendy want to preen. "Nice," he blurted. "You have a gorgeous figure, Auntie Wendy, and your boobs look great in that t-shirt." "Stanley!" His crude fox pass shocked her back to reality. The curly-haired teen was defensive. "Hey, I'm only saying so because it's true. You have stupendous tits, Auntie." He paused for a second, considering. Then, "Why don't you play with them for a bit?" Wendy's eyes went wide. "I beg your pardon," she exclaimed. "Now look here. This has gone about far enough. I'm not going to touch myself in front of you." She drew herself up, definitely, which only made her tits stand out. "Why not?" Stanley said reasonably. "Why not? Why not? Well, of all the... because... She paused. Oddly, despite her outrage, she had trouble remembering exactly why not. Her mind felt fuzzy. Pretty colors glittered along her thoughts, transforming them into strands of garland. Stanley said it was all right for her to touch her titties, so... "Wait a minute! Because you're my nephew, that's why." She pounced on the concept like she was afraid it would get away. "You're my nephew and I'm your aunt, and I expect you to behave yourself accordingly." Maybe she hadn't been as forceful as she intended. Stanley seemed unconvinced. Is that it? He asked mildly. He fiddled with something on his inducer. Well, I think you really want to fondle your big boobies, but you're hesitating because you know how much you like it. They're really sensitive, aren't they? She blinked. I don't think especially. Let's reconsider that. He lifted the inducer and pushed the button. Wendy was flaunting down an avenue of the soft white lights. Red, blue, and gold flowers drifted all around her. She heard Stanley's voice. It was gentle and soothing. Go ahead, Auntie. Play with your tits. You know how good it feels. Give it a try. Why not? Still riding the inducer rainbow, Wendy reached up with both hands to fondle her tits through the Clinton t-shirt. It felt exquisite. She moaned out loud. See? I told you that would feel good. You can't stop now. Go ahead, enjoy it. Stanley was jubilant. Wendy peered at him through glassy eyes. She tried to muster a protest. No, this is so wrong. I shouldn't be playing with the girls right in front of. Oh God, it feels so good. Her dancing fingers refused to stop. It would feel even nicer under the shirt, Stanley supplied. Her eyes widened. No, I couldn't. I shouldn't. All right, yes. Without giving herself more time to think about it, she struggled out of the tight shirt. She pulled it over her head and tossed it on the floor. She shook long hair away from her face. Underneath, she was wearing her favorite blue lace bra. It cupped her buoyant boobs like a pair of loving hands. Instantly, her own hands returned to loving them too. She fondled her breasts keenly, squeezing the nipples. Another moan escaped her, louder this time. She threw her head back, face flushed, wallowing into the sumptuous sensations. Wow, Auntie Wendy, Stanley cried. You have the most amazing tits. Wendy jumped. She had almost forgotten her nephew was standing right there. Her fingers paused for a heartbeat. It's nice to show them off, isn't it? Stanley said helpfully. Don't you just love fondling yourself in front of me? Wendy groaned as the wicked thought hit her. Her fingers resumed pleasuring. Everything had become twisted around backward. What she was doing was utterly wrong, immoral. It felt too wonderful to even consider stopping. Somehow, the knowledge that her own nephew was standing there, watching her, while she made an autoerotic spectacle of herself, only made it hotter. The illicitness of the act added another dimension of heat. Why don't you get rid of the bra? Stanley said offhandedly. It's kinda in the way. Yes, good idea. She was panting now. Impatiently, she reached round to unfasten the straps on her bra. She climbed out of the lacy garment and cast it aside. Her nipples were fully distended, red and eager for more handplay. She indulged them. Stanley watched her, his own excitement written on his face. He said, Boy, you're really getting turned on, Auntie Wendy. Can't help it. Feels so good. A sheen of perspiration glinted on her lovely face. I bet you're awfully wet under that sexy short skirt, Stanley observed. Somehow, though the four-colored pleasure pulsing through her brain, Wendy still managed to be shocked. Stanley, don't say things like that. Well, it's true, isn't it? You're a hot, sexy babe, and you're getting all turned on, showing off your big boobies and playing with them. So, of course, you're getting steamy downstairs, too. Stanley, honey, no, don't talk like, oh, she flexed her hips in need. Stanley raised the inducer. "Here, try this," he said cheerfully. He pushed the button. The lights flashed. In a few seconds, white, red, blue, and gold became the four axes defining Wendy's happy world. She stared blankly, staggered a little, and caught herself against the side of the sofa. She floated peacefully through La La Land. Her hands continued to adore her breasts. Stanley said, "I've got an idea." Then comes a too explicit part, which I skip because of YouTube restrictions. You can find out how to listen to the extended version of the story in the description below, or by watching a separate short video on my channel. The link is on the screen. See you later.